Give a little of yourself. Cure your greed.
نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. 8:26 on a Tuesday evening, and that means it's time for Business Matters. Business Matters brought to you by the Minara Chamber of Commerce. And you with me, Anwar Mullah, for the next 35 minutes or so. And we have really an interesting guest in the studio tonight. And we're going to be talking about debt management and not overspending over the festive period. So before I introduce the guests, Imran's back in the studio with us tonight. Imran, assalamu alaikum.
Salam, and fantastic not to be in the hot seat tonight.
Yes, I see you've got me in the hot seat tonight, and we have a hot guest in the studio. And speaking about the guest, his name is Theasen Pillay. Theasen is an attorney and a debt counselor. He has a legal practice going as TPA Legal, and he has a separate debt counseling business. Theasen, welcome to Radio Al Ansar, and good to have you here on a Tuesday evening.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Okay. Theasen, we thought it's a few weeks to go to the real festive spending time. It's been a very difficult year, and we know for obvious reasons. And we thought it'll be wonderful to chat to you tonight about some of your experiences in terms of debt counseling, in terms of the mistakes that people make over the festive period that comes back to haunt them at a slightly later stage. And we want to unravel all of that. But before doing that, we want to know a little bit more about yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be an attorney.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, the story is a bit interesting. I wanted to become an Air Force pilot.
An Air Force pilot? Okay.
An Air Force pilot. I saw Top Gun, and I wanted to become a maverick. But my father wouldn't have any of that. And as soon as I finished getting my matric, he put me in the car, drove me to university, and when I came back, I was registered for law. So that's how my law career started. But that was the best choice he's ever made, and because
no regrets.
I love it. I absolutely love my profession.
Okay.
Sometimes parents do know best.
Know best.
Most times, Imran. Most times, yeah. Okay. The number in the studio, 0861-904-904. And if you want to send us a WhatsApp and you want to pose a question to Theasen about anything to do with the debt counseling or how you should manage your spending, then the WhatsApp number is 060-904-1056. And I repeat that, 060-904-1056. Let's just get into it, Theasen. We all know that this year has been difficult. We're getting into the festive season. There's obviously gifts to be bought over the festive season, and people tend to overdo it a little bit in terms of all sorts of activities and holidays as well. And you obviously sit with the problems in the months after that. So tell us a little bit about debt counseling and the type of, one or two of the experiences that you've had, but more about what type of people would approach a person like yourself or your firm, and at what stage are they in when they do get to you?
Unfortunately, I always use this example is that people see litigation attorneys and often debt counselors as well, similar as they would see a dentist. In other words, by the time the problem already has existed.
The pain is there already.
The pain is there. Yeah. Something needs to be done. So quite often, people are in denial until such time as they realize the severity and the depth of what they've actually gotten themselves into. And quite frankly, it's not their fault. You must understand that debt arises from credit over indebtedness, and that comes from, you understand credit is the number one industry in the world. So you're talking about billions being put into marketing strategies, put into how to manipulate and entice people. I mean, you don't have credit awareness from an early age. People don't tell you how to manage these accounts. So often you get so wrapped up in the need to try and get more and your emotional in getting these sort of credits, that by the time you realize that you are in over your head, it's far too late. And our job at that point in time is to try and salvage the situation, to make sure that you don't lose your home, you don't lose your assets, you don't fall into the cycle of legal enforcement, because legal enforcement has often very irreparable harm that follows.
Okay. The habit of excessive spending over Christmas, I mean, it's something that we see each year. But people generally, I would say, let their hair down a little bit over that period. I don't know if this year is going to be any different because, I mean, there's been people that haven't been working for a few months. A lot of them will not get bonuses at the end of this year because normally you'd expect a 13 check or a bonus. But a lot of them have been told, well, we're giving you the period off over COVID, but in lieu of your 13 check or in lieu of your bonus at the end of the year. So there's going to be less money circulating in the economy, that's for sure, by way of bonuses, etc. at the end of this year. But yet people would want to spend and they're going to have to find means of spending, and that would inevitably mean getting involved in credit.
Correct. Unfortunately, at this point in time, lots of credit is going to be made accessible. People are going to be looking at extending their credit, even on a short-term basis. So even if there is some account that they currently have, extending that to the max predominantly from an emotional perspective, the feeling that they need to provide more for their families, or maybe it's the indoctrination and the conditioning over years of providing a lot more over this festive season. And often that you're going to see a situation come January, February, when the reality of not being able to comply with those credit obligations will set in, and then legal enforcement claims are made.
But we've already had a situation this year where the banks have given a so-called holiday in inverted commas, and people have taken advantage of that. So we're now over that holiday, which means that your payments have become higher, although interest rates have dropped, so that has cushioned the blow to an extent. And now you're taking on more debt, and it's a recipe for disaster. Give us some statistics in terms of where we as a South African population are in terms of our situation at the moment. Don't scare us, but just give us some realistic.
I'll try not to make it all doom and gloom, but the reality is that shortly before the COVID lockdown, it's a very conservative estimate. You'd have about 60 to 65% of your employed population that is over indebted. 60 to 65% as a very conservative estimate. Now that was pre-lockdown.
Right.
Post-lockdown, going forward, that has increased exponentially. Also, we have now the unemployment. So as a conservative figure, just recently we heard from the MEC's office that the unemployment is sitting in the upper 40%. So you're looking at approximately 44 to 47%
unemployed.
That's scary. That's almost half our population.
That's exceptionally scary. So what that means is if a household has traditionally maybe 3 or 4 income sources, even 2, that now has been reduced to possibly 1 or just over maybe 2. And the consequence of that is that the household's liabilities and the expenses that they must be met, I mean, that amount still is there. But now you have less of an income to sustain that, and therefore that household is now in financial distress.
Understood. And that's where the slippery slope starts.
That's where it starts. And legal enforcement is relentless. Legal actions, look, quite frankly, when a summons is issued, you're just a case number. And if you don't action, or if you don't know that you have these rights and recourses, very shortly from date of summons, later on the sheriff's going to be knocking your door, selling your assets or repossessing.
So let's go through this process a little bit. Someone gets into a bit of debt, and what happens from there on? So who contacts them? After how many days are they contacted after not paying that bill? And what process or what recourse does someone have?
Well, often what's going to happen now is that there isn't much latitude. In other words, once a default starts, traditionally you'd have some time before legal action starts. Now that has hastened. So as soon as
sometime 2 months, 3 months.
Within 2 to 3 months, you're
okay.
going to have the beginning of enforcement, which is called your notice. It's a Section 129 notice that you receive. In essence, a letter of demand.
Okay.
And often people just ignore that. But also, many people don't realize that in terms of compliance with that notice, so creditors must issue that letter
Right.
before they start the process. And how that is issued is generally through registered mail.
Okay.
Most people don't go pick up the registered mail.
So
I
they
mean-
don't get it.
They don't get it. But for the purposes of compliance,
Right.
the creditor has complied with their obligations.
They've sent the post.
They've sent the post. All they have to do is show that the letter was sent to the post office in the area that services that address, and they thus show compliance. They don't
That has to be a registered letter.
register it. They don't have to show that you've picked it up.
Right. Okay. So sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, and when people are in this situation, they try to block it out and not pick up the mail or not read it because it just creates more doom and gloom. So you're not going to be protected if you
You're
have
not
that.
going
That
to-
excuse doesn't stand.
No, so it's not a situation of, look, I didn't get served. I didn't receive it or I didn't sign for it.
Right.
That does not work.
Okay.
And the next step is legal enforcement through a summons.
So a summons, I for one don't fully understand this, but a summons has to be issued to a person's hand.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Summons could be delivered by the sheriff to your residence, could be delivered to the outer door if nobody is there.
Okay.
Could be delivered to some other person who may be in charge. So let's just say hypothetically you are off at work. It could be delivered to somebody else at home.
The reception, for example.
Correct.
Okay. So then once a summons is issued, that would mean you got to appear in court.
Well, that means now legal action has started. And in
Alright.
terms of a summons, you have specific deadlines by which to do something. And
Okay.
often people don't realize that even at that stage, they have rights. And even
Alright.
at that stage, they can be helped. And even at that stage, there are options. Often people are sort of obscured by the fact that, look, I have a debt. I owe this money. So therefore, I have nothing to do. I have no defense. And quite frankly, that's not the position.
All right. So let's continue through the process of legal action, and then we'll come to the recourse and the rights that a consumer who has unfortunately fallen into debt has. So going on, so summons get issued, and then what happens? What do summons usually say?
Well, the summons will spell out what the claim is and have the documents attached to that summons that substantiate and show the basis of that action. Once that summons has been served, the clock then starts.
Okay.
You then have 10 days by which you now need to defend the matter, and if you're defending it, there's a very specific and prescribed format that you will have to adhere to. Now, often people who are trying to defend themselves may not know the strict requirements that are required for compliance in defending a matter, and in that they will fall short and fall through the cracks.
Okay.
And as I said, the legal system, quite frankly, is quite relentless. If you don't comply, you haven't complied. And for that reason, you're then going to have a situation where judgments are now granted. And you're trying to rescind a judgment is an even more stricter set of compliance that you'll have to show and requirements to rescind that judgment to prevent the sheriff from now coming and repossessing.
But Theasen, speaking to banks, and we do, or quite often, they generally are saying, look, we don't want to repossess your goods. What good is it for us to be sitting with your car sitting in a yard full of 100 other cars that we've repossessed from other people? Basically a depreciating asset. We're really not going to recover what you're owing us. We don't want to repossess your home. So it's as a last resort that the banks would take to this in terms of repossessing or doing what they have to throw you out of your house or literally take your wheels away from you. By and large, they want to negotiate. They want to settle. They want to do something so that you're helping them to help themselves as well. And how would you go about this? Where do you start from? Somebody approaches you and says, well, I'm in debt and unfortunately I'm in over my head. I can't afford my monthly repayments. What would you do? Where do you come in, and what advice would you give them?
My advice is, coming from a litigation attorney that's in practice for over 20 years, is you don't want to litigate.
You want to avoid litigation.
You want to avoid litigation because litigation is expensive, and in some instances, you are inevitably just delaying the final result in it. And you're making it a lot more expensive
for yourself
and inconvenient for yourself. So you want to take action as fast as possible because doing so will reduce the amount of money that you eventually are going to pay.
Right.
Like, for example, people feel that, okay, look, there's a judgment and currently I don't have any assets, so what are they going to do? They don't realize that judgment is now enforceable for a period of 30 years.
30 years.
30 years.
Right.
Now, for that, you can have interest run to the same value of your claim. So, hypothetically, let's say you're owing a few 100,000 rand. Creditor can sit on your judgment, wait a few years, let the interest climb up,
Right.
and now suddenly you're owing double,
Okay.
excluding your legal fees, excluding other disbursements. So now, at some point in time, I mean, we're all going to pass on. That money comes from your estate.
Right.
Your creditors will get paid first, then your children, then the rest of your years.
Then your beneficiaries. Yeah.
Correct. So it does not work out in your best interest.
It doesn't go away.
It doesn't. It doesn't
Yeah.
go away. So the faster you take action, the better it is.
Okay. So you've prepared a very extensive dossier here for us to go through, and there's a whole lot of proposals you have in terms of what people can do. But I like the one that says start small. Start with 50 rand. So talk us through it.
I tell my, your baby steps. I always tell my clients is that it's the small things that matter. Don't worry about how much rands the cents make up the rands. And if I just take an example, people say they're going for a small holiday, or something extravagant over December time. If you look at how much that's going to cost, nothing international, but you look at a small holiday, you're going to
Local.
you're spending about 20,000 rand.
Easy. Yeah.
Easy.
All right.
So, if during the year you save per day, say 50 rand.
50 rand a day. Yeah.
Now, 50 rand a day is not a lot of money. In terms
Most
of
office people would spend that amount on lunch.
more exactly. Now, that 50 rand a day over a 30-day month times 12 months is equating to about 18,000 rand.
So that can pay for your end of the year holiday.
It's the small things. And when you start minding the sense, when you take responsibility and accountability for your own finances and be your own auditor and look at what you're spending money on. So every year, at the beginning of the year, go through your, renegotiate your premiums on your insurance policies, look at your bank statements and see where your money is going, and do for a short period. Invest 3 months into yourself and do a daily audit. At the end of the day, it's going to take you no more than 5 minutes. See where you spent your money.
Right.
From that exercise, you will then realize you may have overspent on certain things, and that's going to be a catalyst for why you're going to save your money on that.
Okay. So what you're saying is look within yourself and see where you can take out that few cents or a few rands every day and put that aside.
Those few rands every day add up to a sizable amount.
Okay. The other thing that you need to tell us about is people have debt in various forms. They would have a bond on a house, they will have a repayment on a car, and then they'll have overspending or they have debt on their credit card. And all of these incur interest at different rates. So would you not advise by saying get rid of the most heaviest interest rate, which would probably be your credit cards first, and then work downwards from there?
Absolutely.
Or consolidate your debt?
Absolutely. You want to try and pay off as much of the interest as possible. Make sure that you pay on time, because the interest payment, which we call moral interest, and then you have the penalties that result, are often the factors that cause you to be in credit arrangements longer than you need to.
Yes, it ticks along very quickly.
And when you in that red area, it's very often that from there you slip into now being legal action instituted. What I would recommend to people is where there is credit installments, like for example your bonds and your car installments, pay a little extra.
Right.
It doesn't have to be substantial amount extra, but just that little amount that you pay. So for example, if you have a bond and you're paying just a few 100 rand a month extra, that few 100 rand over a 20-year period actually equates to hundreds of thousands.
Rest. Yeah.
So that you will save. So it's the smaller things that actually will make the biggest decisions.
But also, there's certain debt that incurs higher rates of interest.
Correct.
Should you not be paying those ones off first? For example, if you've borrowed from a money lender or one of these finance houses, and I think they're pretty ruthless in terms of the rates that they charge. Secondly, I know credit cards incur a very high rate of interest. If you've borrowed against your credit card and you're only paying the minimum amount each month, the rates of interest are very high. Banks love it because they make more money out of you. Would you not advocate paying off those debts first before tackling your house bond and your car installment?
I will. And I'll also advise people that have gotten credit relatively easy
Right.
to contact a debt counselor or an attorney that is specialized in that field, simply to look through that transaction to determine if that constitutes reckless credit. I'm not sure if anyone's ever mentioned the concept of reckless credit before.
Go for it. Yeah.
So reckless credit is essentially a situation where credit has been given to a consumer without the credit provider having done a due diligence on that consumer. In other words, have they really checked and made a decision as to whether this consumer is able
To repay.
To repay?
Right.
Have the documents been thoroughly vetted? And if the answer to those questions are no, then that is a reckless transaction, reckless credit transaction. And as a consequence of that, the consumer would not be liable to pay that.
Really?
So in other words, if you received X amount of money, albeit that you did receive it,
Yes.
you could have an order in your favor saying that you don't have to repay it at all.
Ah, okay.
So this is very important consideration for people that have received credit, and because quite often creditors will just send you an SMS or contact you and say, well, based on your performance, we're now giving you you're now available to get additional 10,000 Rand as a loan. Now, in those instances, there aren't really credit checks or credit assessments that are being done properly, and often you have a situation where reckless credit is being given.
Okay, so let's take an example. I find myself in debt. I cannot afford my repayments. Banks are sitting on me. Other people are hounding me. I've borrowed. I now come to you, as you say, the pain is too extensive. And I come to you and I don't like doing this, but I pick up the phone and I say, Theasen, help me. I'm in trouble. Where do you start?
Okay, we do what's called a assessment to see that you qualify for debt counseling. In other words, that you're over indebted, and quite often, in most instances, it's a very simple examination. Once we do that, we then look at whether there's a means to repay that. In other words, from your income,
Right.
are you able to renegotiate and pay these debts, these accounts off? And most often, once we do that exercise, you're left with a situation where the client then pays approximately 40 to 60% less.
Really?
And then from their income, that amount that is now saved goes towards their living expenses. So now they actually have a better quality of life, their assets are secured, and their creditors are being paid. So it's negotiations that are done with the creditors, where we also reduce sometimes the interest rates.
So as soon as a person approaches a debt counselor and the debt counselor kind of gets involved, is it a means of keeping the creditors at bay for a period of time?
Correct. So the idea.
So you would write to each of those creditors?
Immediately, all of your creditors are contacted and advised that the process has started, and they now liaise directly with the actual debt counselor and no longer the consumer.
Right.
So all of the phone calls, all of the harassing calls, all of that stops.
Right.
And now your assets are secured.
Okay.
And I take it the debt counselor now looks at the person's statement of assets and liabilities, incomes and expenses, and draws out some sort of payment plan.
In essence, yes. So now we renegotiate your payments with your creditors.
Okay. And from a creditor's point of view, obviously creditors now have to wait longer for their money than expected. Is there any compensation from a creditor's point of view?
Well, the creditor gets their full account paid.
Over a longer duration?
Well, generally it's within 5 years.
Right.
But that will be in an instance where there are multiple accounts and generally some sizable accounts. But yes, so debt counseling, the process behind it is to give the consumer a breathing space it's supposed to be a temporary process. So it's not there to last indefinitely. So as a maximum, we then try to resolve a debt counseling process within 5 years.
Okay.
And tell me, it isn't that during that period does the interest clock keep ticking, or is it come to a
No, we try and renegotiate lower interest rates so that you don't end up paying more over this period.
Yes, because what sometimes happens, and I'm saying not even sometimes, often happens, is all you're doing is servicing your interest. And sometimes you're in so over your head that you can't even pay the interest. So that capital value keeps going up instead of coming down over time. So, I mean, how amicable are some of these institutions to saying, well, I can pay my capital, but you know what, you need to stop the interest clock or bring that interest rate down to an absolute minimum?
This comes back to what we started at the beginning when you mentioned that, the financial institutions and banks willing to settle and wanting a payment.
Payment, yes.
So we've not had any difficulties in the last 10 years in trying to come through to an arrangement with the creditors. Now remember that where you have a situation where sometimes there is not the creditor, you're unable to get that agreement in place, we then simply settle down in court and get a court order.
If that's possible.
That's the process. That's the debt counseling process. So it's more than just picking up the phone and trying to renegotiate on your behalf. It's literally drafting court papers, taking it to court, and getting a court order saying, well, this is the new arrangement.
Okay.
And then these institutions or creditors have to comply.
Correct.
Can they do the same from their side and get a court order that says that the consumer has to pay?
Well, they can oppose your application.
Right.
And then the court will then make a decision based on the papers as to what would be a fair order to make. Okay.
I think we've went through a lot of what the consumer can and cannot do, what creditors can and cannot do. But for the general population out there and ourselves, can we talk a bit more about some of the tips that of saving through this Christmas period and not getting carried away?
I would advise people not to take unnecessary financial risks. Like we said earlier, the unemployment has now peaked to the highest it's ever been, and it's from projected forecasts and concerns and just the feel out there is that it's going to increase further. So I would advise people not to put all the eggs in one basket and spend what they have currently, because January and February is likely to be a little more uncertain than it already has been. So that may place a family in unnecessary legal risks. So my advice would be, where a family is already in the red in terms of their finances, the lockdown has been phenomenal in the sense of families reuniting and finding new means by which they can, just try and have as best as possible and the most inexpensive Christmas possible.
Well, I think the one golden rule would be don't borrow. If you don't borrow, you'll never be in trouble. So live within your means, spend what you have, and don't borrow.
That will be the best advice.
Absolutely. There's a famous saying, and I've heard it a few times now, but it says is too many people are buying the things they don't need with the money they don't have to show to the people they don't like. And you analyze that, and it's really true. People are buying things with the money they don't have to show the people they don't like with the money they don't have. So if we stop doing that and trying to live up to the Joneses and live within our means, we'd all be okay.
And all of that is very, very temporary.
Yes. Yeah.
All of that is really...
The satisfaction is temporary.
Come past the festive season, the money that has been spent into that temporary moment has been lost. But the debt is still there.
The debt is still there.
The debt is there.
Yeah. So the enjoyment is gone, but the problem is still sitting with you.
Well, Theasen, if any of the listeners out there wanted to get in contact with yourself or, for debt counseling purposes, how would one do so?
I have two offices. I have an office in Shlanga. It's in the first floor of the Protea Hotel, and that office number is 566-743. That's 566.
566-743.
743.
Right.
Okay.
also have an office in Vertlem,
All right.
and that number is 087 2324 247.
Sorry, come again with that.
Sorry, 087
Right.
23
08723
24
24
24 7.
247. So 0872324 Okay. 24/7 you're on the ball.
We try and be, yes.
Okay. Yeah, some some parting advices from you. We've got about 4 minutes left on the program in terms of just advice to people that are finding that they are in a hopeless situation at the moment. Don't lose hope.
Do not lose hope. Do not give up. Make inquiries. Just ask for help. Ask for advice. And I think above all, people need to believe in themselves. And when you believe in yourself and you know your worth, you tend to spend more wisely. And this is not me speaking. This is literally, if you follow all the advice and motivational out there, is that when you start to believe in yourself and have more confidence in what you are doing and your purpose, you tend to be a little less reckless in your spending. And you tend to not want to spend in trying to please others. And through that process, you tend to make wiser decisions. So just be more mindful of what you're spending and what is the purpose behind that. And through that, you'll realize that, you might just save yourself considerable legal hardship.
Okay, one thing that we didn't touch on, which is very important, is people don't like approaching debt counselors because they're saying, well, I'm already in so much of debt and now I'm going to have to pay the debt counselor. Okay, so what are your fees?
Okay, so debt counselors, well, we don't charge a fee to consult with you and to look at your matter. That's part of it's free.
Right.
So we don't charge people to do an assessment, to look at their documents, etc. How the debt counselor gets paid, and this answers your question, is simply the first month's reduced installment. So let's just say hypothetically you were paying 5,000 Rand a month towards
Right.
all of your credit accounts, and now it's going to be 3,000 Rand. The first month reduced installment goes to the debt counselor.
Right.
That's their fee.
Is that it?
That's their fee. Going forward, they have what's called a maintenance fee, where I think it's about 3% of your installment goes towards them.
Right. So it's minimal.
So there's no additional fee that you need to pay over and above what you're currently paying towards your accounts.
Okay.
And the debt counselor's fees are prescribed.
Okay.
So, which means that you have to follow this.
A debt counselor can't just make up exorbitant fees.
Yes, and it's regulated. And look, it has been known that certain debt counselors, who with everything, have not charged properly. But this is a regulated industry, and if you have any concerns, any queries that debt counselor may not have charged you what you're supposed, you're welcome to inquire with the regulator.
And I suppose that the mere fact that a bank gets a call from a debt counselor as opposed to the client himself, they stand up and take notice of you because they know the person is now serious about sorting his matters out.
Correct.
Okay, so it makes a difference.
And the creditors are a lot more receptive to arrangements being made from the debt counselor.
Okay, excellent. Theasen, has been wonderful chatting to you. You've given us a lot of insight into what can and cannot be done in terms of debt counseling, in terms of trying to get rid of that excess debt that people have, and also in trying to say to people, please be very careful about how you spend during this festive period. It's very tempting. Imran, no Christmas presents for you for this year. Okay. But we'll get you something for Eid, don't worry. Okay.
I can live with
Well,
that.
it's been wonderful being with you. Thanks once again for coming into the studio. And
It's
I'm
been
sure
absolute
some
pleasure.
of our
Thank you.
listeners are going to take you up on your offer of doing an assessment and seeing if we can save them some money over the long run.
Absolutely.
So-
Thank you so much.
That's it from us for tonight on the Minara Chamber of Business or the Business Matters program brought to you by the Minara Chamber of Commerce. It's been wonderful having Theasen here giving us some insight. Imran, thanks for being in the studio. And
Absolute
inshallah,
pleasure.
we'll be back again next week with another exciting guest in another program of the Business Matters program. Mr. Abdul is behind the controls here, and thanks Abdul for once again being the technician for tonight. With that, it's wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Radio Al Ansar, 24/7, 365.
There are over 200 million orphans globally. We can't help all of them, but what if we each helped just one? The Al Imdad Foundation now gives you an opportunity to help just one orphan from Syria or Palestine. For just 500 Rand per month, you can help safeguard the dignity of an orphan by assisting them with basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and attention. Our orphan sponsorship program allows you to track the progress of your orphan through regular feedback. Make a difference in the life of an orphan today. Visit alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
An informative Islamic global perspective.